there had to have been some cracks in how you perceive the church and leadership and everything. You know, at some point,
I read the CES letter in 2013. I read it right when it came out, John.
Okay, so, and this is the point I'm making. Like, for a long time, when you're on this guilt and shame cycle, it's always me, it's always me, it's always me. It sounds like that erroneous and egregious temple calling and then withdrawal and exclusion. Am I right in understanding that maybe started some cracks in your faith?
Yeah,
Major.
for sure.
Where you're like, wait a minute, this whole time I've been saying I'm the problem.
Major.
And so talk about that mindset. So what year was that temple calling about approximately?
Would have been around 2007.
So between 2007 and 2000 and let's just say 14-ish,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
some things start changing. So just really quickly describe those 7 years. What happens to how you view the church and how you view yourself and how you view your family in the church? And then, Crystal, I want to hear your perspective of those 7 years.
Okay.
Right?
Those 7 years, I began to be very suspicious of church leaders. Very much so.
Yeah.
I began to think that a lot of them were just putting on a face. I began to think that there was this hierarchy, and I didn't like how people glorified the brethren, as they call it. I didn't like it. I started to see church leadership for what it was, and what it was a bunch of imperfect men hiding behind a mantle. It's almost like a self-proclaimed, self-endowed mantle. I couldn't fathom even then. You know what I started to think? Okay, I'm glad you said this, because this is coming out. I started to think that the church isn't true, but it was. It used to be. And the tornado and all my mission service and my testimony was all based on Joseph Smith and the early church, but I started to believe that something had gone wrong along the way, and I hadn't read anything. I just had a feeling, John. I had a feeling that somewhere along the way, we've gotten away from the truth. And because I no longer believe that the brethren, as they call them, the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, I no longer believed in my heart that they were literally God's prophet and apostles. I don't see it because there's no miracles, John. Show me the miracles. Show me the healing. Show me the revelation. I mean, 2-hour church, this is your revelation? I mean, and we celebrate 2-hour church. Why don't you celebrate 4 hours church? If church is so good for you and you love it so much, why do they all throw a celebration for 2-hour church? It makes no sense. And why are they all begging for coffee to be legalized? You know, none of it makes any sense, John. You're getting me a little fired up now.
No, it's
I'm sorry.
okay, but go back to that 7-year. So you're starting to feel like it might not be true, but you're in this marriage and you're surrounded by this culture. And so what does that do to you? So how do you start to behave as a result of this cognitive dissonance?
I didn't want to go to church. I would try to find every excuse to get out of going. When I had callings, I wouldn't fulfill them. Not like I used to. I wouldn't magnify them. I would just do the bare minimum.
You would do them, but it was just...
it was a sad deal because usually I'm very passionate about, enthusiastic about everything I do, but not anymore for the church. I just became very jaded, very withdrawn. I wouldn't say a lot in lessons. I'd go to elders' quorum. I would just sit there quiet, not say a word. So oftentimes I would sneak out. I would go to church. I would sneak out and go drive around the neighborhood and not even tell my wife I was ditching out on church. All kinds of things started to happen around that. In fact, it got so bad that I think a half dozen times I was so unhappy, and I decided, John, that even if it's true, I'm unhappy and I'm sick of it. And I'm sick of being unhappy. And even if it's untrue, I just want to be happy. And so I started telling Crystal things like, Crystal, you don't have to be a leader in the church to be a spiritual person. I would say things like that a lot. I would say, Crystal, a lot of what the church does is just to be seen. A lot of these guys aspire to those callings. A lot of that's political. Have you ever noticed how the stake president calls his best friend the bishop? I picked up on everything, John, all the subtle details, all the little nuances of, the political garbage, the social, everything that, and it wasn't even doctrinal yet. Even when the Crystal, I said, okay, I'm not going to come at the doctrine, but this is wrong about the culture. This is wrong about the administration. This is wrong about the social aspect of it. And I turned to her, not to other people, but to my sweet wife. I got pretty antagonistic against the church. There were times, John, last thing I'll say about it, 6 times, I'd be out and about, I'd be unhappy, and I had every reason to be happy, John. I was making lots of money, beautiful children, beautiful wife. I had everything going for me, but I was unhappy because of the church. And that's when 6 times I said, I'm going to go home. I would rehearse this. I'm going to go home. I'm going to sit my family down. I'm going to tell them that God told me that the modern day prophet and apostles are not true. Joseph Smith was a prophet, but these guys have fallen away and they're just looking apart. They don't speak to Jesus. He doesn't guide them. There's no revelation. I had it all played out, John. And then I would think, it's going to cost me my marriage. She's too committed. I can't do it. She'll leave me. She'll kick me out.
So, Crystal, listeners are saying they really want to hear from you. So you're having several kids, you're recommitted, you're buying into this sort of worthiness, hustle for worthiness kind of thing, and now you're watching your husband slide into less than faithfulness.
Yeah.
Talk about the woman's or the wife's perspective. And I'll just have to say that part of what's so tragic is you're actually starting to see things clearly, Sean, in this paradigm, because all those things you witnessed about male leadership is true. And you're starting to question the church's truthfulness, which is legitimate. And so even as you're being perceived by Crystal as falling away and being dark and unworthy, from a reality standpoint, you're actually starting to claim your own power, trust your own instincts, and see the world clearly for the first time. And so I just have to note this paradox of you awakening in a very positive, grounded, truthful way. But Crystal, from your perspective, that must have not been very exciting or happy. So talk about what it's like to see him slide into that place.
I don't think I really understood or even thought that this had anything to do with his testimony. I think like his being negative or critical, I just thought it was his personality. Like he's just, he kind of, I always just thought he was just more critical about things. And so I didn't really read into it. I just thought that's just Sean, I guess. He's just, he calls people out if he doesn't like what they're doing. And he's not afraid to say it. And for me, I've always been more like, let's not ruffle any feathers. Like, we don't have to tell people if we don't like what they're doing. Let's just let them be them, And so I just I got really irritated every time he would say anything negative towards the church. And like, that's disrespectful. You shouldn't say things like that. And so 5 years ago, it really had that impact on our marriage, and I was so frustrated. And so I started to decide to just shift my focus and start working on my own personal development, because I was suffering so much because I was so worried about the way he was acting, and the way he was living. And I got more consumed in worrying about him, and I realized that that's not where true growth happens. And so I realized that I needed to focus on my own personal development. How can I just be the best version of myself and allow him to be where he's at? So in this, so I just embarked on my own spiritual journey and personal development without focusing so much on him. And that journey allowed me to just be more accepting of him where he's at, and allow him to say what he wants, allow him to be who he is. And once I just became a little more accepting and just focusing on working on myself, that's when I realized that I had my own doubts. When I started thinking, putting the focus on myself. And did you want me to go into?
Well, before we do that, so did it reach a point where there was tension because of the spiritual or religious differences in commitment, where you were expressing disappointment or feeling disappointment, or Sean, where you were feeling like you were
all the
disappointment?
time? I would say, I remember my exact words.
Talk about that, because
sitting on the stairs, yelling at each other, and I was like, "Step it up, Sean." You are not the spiritual guy that I thought I married, you know? Like, come on. Yeah. You need to step it up as the patriarch of the home. We need to be doing family prayers and family scripture study. We need to go every Sunday and keep the Sabbath day holy.
And what's making you feel that way at the time?
I think just that finally getting to that stage in motherhood.
Were you afraid of something?
I was afraid of dropping the ball as parents.
Because what would happen? What were you afraid
that we would all this time would pass and be like, we didn't raise good kids that are making the right choices. So I just felt a little fear, I guess, around doing our part the best of our abilities as parents.
And there had to have been some tie to your upbringing, right? Like, your upbringing probably wasn't fantastic. Yeah,
I think for sure I always thought, I'm not going to have that same life. I'm going to make sure that we do everything right. We're not going to have a divorce. We are going to be spiritually worthy all the time and wearing our garments and, temple worthy. And I just had this ideal picture in my mind of what our life would not be based on my upbringing. And so my expectations were really high because I wanted to make sure that we had, I just thought that we could do it perfectly.
There was the perception too, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. The cultural perception and being in the community and wanting to look that part, Yeah, there's definitely that. Wanting to make sure that we are seen as spiritual people and our kids are good and we go to church and we do what is right.
That we fit the mold.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so, Sean, what's it like to be awakening to yourself for the first time, starting to gain your own orientation to the real world and your own voice and your own power, and to be told, step it up by your wife? What does that do to you, to your intimacy, to your marriage?
I thought she was right about me. I really did. When she would tell me, you're negative, you're critical, you resent authority, this is all you, I thought she was right about me. And so when we got in that big fight, John, and how did I feel, John? Yeah, I felt like I was a horrible person. I felt like I wasn't worthy, and I also felt I wasn't spiritual. I felt like I wasn't one of the spiritual guys at that time. It was all stirring. It was too fresh. And then I think we almost went down the road of divorce. I think so.
We'd never been in a fight for that long, and where he left overnight.
And this was 5 years ago?
Yeah.
2014?
Yeah, because Owen was a baby.
Yeah, but I mean, I had already read the CES letter.
So talk about that. So talk about how you started to move from having concerns about the culture and criticisms of the culture to the truth claims. How did that start?
I couldn't. I read it.
Wait, so how did you even, was that the first thing? How did you find it?
There was whisperings about it. I think my brother actually said that everybody's talking about this. Everybody's talking about this letter to the CES president. I didn't even know what it was, but I was always.
You can go to csletter.org. Jeremy Runnels, shared his experience of learning problems about the church's truth claims, and having concerns, trying to talk to a CES director who was a family friend, writing him a letter, trying to say, hey, I've got problems with all these issues, polygamy, polyandry, the Book of Abraham, Book of Mormon historicity, did it really happen, anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, all this stuff. He writes the letter to the CES director that his dad referred him to, trying to get help, and the letter was never answered, and he never got satisfactory answers to his questions. So he published the letter on the internet, csletter.org, and ultimately is excommunicated for just sharing that letter. But anyway, so you hear about the letter.
I looked the letter up. I read the entire letter. I thought I was bulletproof. I thought nothing can shake me. My testimony was too strong. My conversion, let's call it my conversion, was too strong. I read the letter, and keep in mind, my issues at the time were cultural, administrative, political. I read the letter and I dismissed it. I read the entire thing and I dismissed it. And I said to myself, a lot of that's a little unsettling. However, I'm going to shelf all of it because I can't deny that I had an answer to my prayer. And
back then, when? What answer to your prayer?
2000. My answer to my prayer, the tornado.
The tornado. Yeah.
The tornado always resurfaced for me.
Yeah.
I mean, tornadoes happen all over the world, right? And
not in downtown Salt Lake and not this big.
No, I know. No, I'm just saying, like, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, natural disasters, all sorts of bad things happen to people, right?
Yeah.
But it's the religious context that allows us to make those associations.
Yeah. That's right.
And those simple associations, it can be a license plate that you see.
You'll find what you're looking for. You'll find what you're looking for. And not only that, that's the crazy thing about the brain. Your brain will assign that meaning and draw those connections, and your brain is actually giving you the answer because you want the answer.
Yeah. It's confirmation bias. Go look it up.
Confirmation bias.
It's crazy. When I learned about confirmation bias, and I think I learned about it through your podcast, I was like, that's cognitive dissonance. I was like I was guilty of it more than anybody. But here, keep in mind, I had kind of subconsciously made up my mind that I was unhappy in the church. And even though I really believed Joseph was a prophet and the Book of Mormon was true, I was sick of being unhappy. And I kind of consigned to, I would rather live a happy life and go to hell. Because I'm already in hell. This is not fun for me. That's kind of where I was. Yeah. But that fight, to be fair, we got in that fight. Crystal went on this massive quest of personal development and growth. But it was all stuff outside of the church. Everything she was reading was outside of the church, okay? And at the same time, she came this way towards me. She became a lot more tolerant towards me and loving, appreciative. And I came this way because I said, if I don't start stuffing this stuff down, it's going to end in a divorce. And so we kind of met in the middle. And
so even though you read the CS letter, you dismissed it. And you said, I'm stuffing. From now on, I'm stuffing.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
How did that feel for you, Crystal, to have him kind of back off and stuff?
Oh, I didn't really notice. I didn't notice any change, really.
Yeah, maybe I didn't. I don't know. I thought I was far less critical. I started to, when my nephew went on his mission, I literally said to myself, I have got to be a better Mormon, and I just stopped. I tried my hardest to stop being critical of the church. I tried. I guess maybe I wasn't so good at that.
In your mind, I mean, who knows? In your mind, it's more about what you were feeling and how you were trying to manage your emotions.
Yeah.
And you're saying that you realized that your marriage and your family was at stake. That people are asking how many kids you had by this point.
We had. I was pregnant with my fourth when we had that big blow-up fight.
I remember when my nephew went on his mission, I remember thinking, I've got to be a better Mormon. And I started trying again. And then I stopped being so critical. I stopped talking about those things. And I think that was like 2 years ago or so. And I really made a conscious effort at that point. And then I consigned to the fact. That I'm going to be Mormon the rest of my life. I have to go. I have to participate. And I might as well submit.
I think the reason why I didn't notice is because I took my focus off of him. So I wasn't paying attention to, is he becoming more spiritual now? Is he being less critical? I just stopped noticing it altogether because it was causing me too much anger and resentment.
Yeah. Okay. Really quickly, Sean, what is it? I think the church is full, hundreds of thousands, if not more, of Mormons that at some point realized it wasn't true or there are big problems here. But if I come out, it could affect my marriage. I could lose my family. I'll disappoint my parents or my grandparents. And then many have economic ties to the church, and they're like, it could wreck my income.
Yeah.
And so many Mormons are in the church, but they're stuffing. Can you talk really briefly about if for you there were any psychological costs to kind of flipping that bit and just stuffing and trying to just fit the mold and internalize any doubts or fears or questions that you might have? Or for you, is there no cost psychologically to that?
Costs?
And then we'll turn to Crystal's awakening.
Costs. Do you mean costing me what was my true nature? Is that what you mean?
No, because that's significant. But for many people, internalizing distress leads to depression and anxiety, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Or self-medication.
I got to tell you, I can put on a happy face. I can be the enthusiastic guy if I have to be. I can fake things if I have to. I don't like to. I really don't. I like to be real, but it doesn't feel good to fake things. I just felt inauthentic.
And over time, does that wear on you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I can't wait to tell how much things have changed over this last year since,
we're going to get there.
Yeah,
we're going to get there.
Crazy.
Yeah, John, you're making me think about a lot of really deep things. You really are causing me to think about a lot of things, but I think, I'd meet people all the time, John. This is probably what you're getting at. I'd meet people all the time and I thought I was like really cool and successful and worthwhile and intelligent. I thought I was. But I would meet people all the time and they would say, "Why are you holding back?" And I would say, I'd get my pride would, and what are you talking about? Sean, you don't give people the opportunity to get to know you. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Talking about. Yeah. People don't know what they're talking about. And I can see now. I can see and it wasn't one or two, John, it wasn't one or two people that would say this. These were brave people coming up to me, and I was a millionaire, and I was, and they were saying, "You're not bringing it." And I was like, who are you to say that to me? Not a few, John. Yeah. It happened a lot.
Yeah. And just like sometimes Orthodox religion can condition us to be dishonest, it can condition us to be inauthentic.
Yeah, really closed off.
And it's all about this false sense of self that you're projecting to the world. And maybe it wasn't true in your case, but in so many cases I've seen the anxiety, the depression, when you're stuffing that and you're packing it down and you're packing down what you really think and who you really are and what you really feel, sometimes you create this split life where you all develop all sorts of secret behaviors that aren't, what you present to the public. And that's got its own set of problems. But even if you don't do that, there's just this internal distress that you're always packing down and managing that can lead to all sorts of self-medication or depression or really unhealthy behaviors. And again, that may or may not have been your experience, but I just want to call out as a mental health professional that really wears on people. And when you hear about people getting autoimmune deficiency sort of diseases or, Epstein-Barr or chronic fatigue or all these different sorts of things, or even irritable bowel.
Wow, that's crazy.
And digestive problems,
that's
right?
That's crazy, John.
He got sick a lot, and I was resentful.
My gut was
resentful
really bad
about how much he got sick because I always thought you were doing it to yourself.
And yet here I was, this health guy. I exercise, I eat well, John. I do all those things right, and the stress, you're right. The stress was killing me. And I had all kinds of health problems. Also, I would like to talk about the pornography if it's time to visit that.
Was that happening in this timeline?
I looked at pornography off and on my entire marriage.
And what was that like for you?
Okay, so I looked at pornography, and Crystal, right out the gate, when we started dating, she made it very clear. And not once or twice. I mean, this was a recurring theme. I could never tolerate my husband to look at pornography. It's unacceptable. It is cheating. She would say it is cheating. And I think her exact. Oh, sorry. I think her exact words were, "If you were to do that, I don't think that I could." What was the word you used? I don't think that I could tolerate that. And I interpreted that as, "I will divorce you." So this was a hard thing. I don't think I had an unhealthy, now looking back, at the time, if I'd look at pornography, I felt horrible. And I would only usually look at it as like if Crystal didn't want to have sex, and there was a lot of times, you can explain why that was, but there was a lot of times where Crystal would say, no, I don't want to have sex, and I would want it. So I would turn to pornography, not to say that that's not your fault. I made the decision to turn to pornography. It's not that I wasn't justified in turning to pornography, but my relationship or our belief around pornography and sex and such things has changed a lot in the last year.
Yeah.
But I just remember feeling this overwhelming amount of guilt every time that I would periodically look at pornography. And I would feel like I was just evil. And I put a great big picture of Jesus right in front of my computer. And it was Jesus, the one picture where half his face is merciful and the other half of his face is very stern and just. And I had quotes all over my office about obedience and about pornography, like indirectly about pornography, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
that was your one thing that you felt like
was my one thing that and so I never told Crystal, and because I thought it would end my marriage, and my marriage was too valuable to me. I couldn't afford to lose that. And so periodically she would repeat, and sometimes she would look at me square in the eyes in like a private setting, and she would look at me and she would say, "You've never looked at pornography, have you?" And then I would say, "No." And I would lie to her over and over and over, because it wasn't going to cost me my marriage. And I really believed she would leave me. And I know people I know marriages that have ended because of pornography. Keep in mind, I'm a man. I've always been a man my whole life. And I know how men are. I know how men think. I know how men operate. Every single man has looked at pornography. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know every single, but I think like a good 90%, would you say?
I think the majority. Okay. And it's my opinion, and I'm not justifying my actions, but I no longer think that what I did was what I thought it was. But the guilt, John, I killed myself over this. I would cry. I would be on my hands and knees begging God to just remove that urge to look at pornography, and I would be crying and begging him to just take that away. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't looking at it like, I don't think that I was chronically addicted, but I would go like 3 months without looking at any, and then something would happen, really stressed out, or she didn't want to be intimate, or sometimes we'd get in a fight. I don't think I ever even told you this, but sometimes we'd get in a big fight, and I don't know why, but I would feel like justified, like almost like retaliation. Ugh. And so I would indulge in that periodically. And then when I did, I felt like I was the scum of the earth and I had no discipline and that I was out of favor with God. And I couldn't own up to it, John, because again, my wife, she made it clear from the get-go, and over 15 years, she made it very clear that that's the one thing I absolutely have no tolerance for whatsoever.
And what were you thinking, Crystal?
When he told me?
No. What were you thinking just about?
Throughout my marriage?
Yeah, about porn.
Why that was such a big deal. I think because of the sexual abuse growing up gave me a really, put a lot of fear in me around sexuality. And I thought that pornography could lead to perversions or cheating or, so it was just always at the top of my mind because of my experience growing up. And I just, I just felt really a lot of fear. That's really what it was. Because I thought I didn't have the right education around it. And I really thought that pornography leads to those types of things.
And I just, again, as a mental health professional, if there are Orthodox Mormons that listen to Mormon stories, and you guys, because you'll share this and have shared this on social media, there will be people who listen who are Orthodox Mormons. As a mental health professional who has had as clients hundreds, if not thousands, of Orthodox Mormons, I can tell you, bishops look at porn, bishopric members look at porn, stake high councilman members look at porn, stake presidency members look at porn, They all have masturbation problems. They all have porn problems. And again, Crystal, not all, but so many. I have intelligence that there are general authorities who have had porn problems and who have been caught looking at porn, in church administrative offices. Like and so I want to disabuse you of the idea that, that Crystal and Sean ended up losing their faith. Well, of course they did. It's because they looked at porn. It's a worldwide church epidemic from the highest levels of leadership on down. We now are made aware of stake presidents that are caught in parks with prostitutes, right? So, but you can't blame any of that on porn because it's so pervasive that if porn were the cause of child abuse, if porn were the cause of perversions, everyone would be child abusers and everyone would be perverts, but they're not, It's just something that is a reality in the 2000s. I'm not saying that porn is even good. Like, don't even mistake that we're saying on Mormon Stories podcast that porn's a good thing. Some will say that there's healthy erotica and that sometimes it can be useful. But the point is that here isn't even to sort of say porn is good necessarily. But what I am going to say is it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And it's your current bishop, it's your current
it's
councilman. It's women too. It's your Relief Society president, right?
I go so far as to say it's your husband, and I know that offends a lot of people.
Or your wife, right?
Yeah.
They're wives too. So anyway, I just want to dispel that. It's part of it's again part of the shame cycle where porn is going to be so pervasive on the internet these days that everybody's going to be confronted with it. And again, the tragedy is not the porn itself, although there are deep problems with porn and the way women are treated and the way men are treated and the way that it objectifies people and the child abuse and the working conditions. Like, again, we can talk about all the problems of porn. But for me, the really big problem with porn within the Mormon church is how we talk about it. Because the person who views the porn thinks of themselves as dirty and awful and loathsome. But because of that, they feel like they have to lie about it. So they become liars. Again, the church training us to become liars. And then they develop this private life and the public life, and they learn to be fake in public. And we're gonna get to this when we get to, Sterling Van Wagenen. You get your public voice and your public face and your public testimony because you learn from a young age to separate what you do in private with how you appear. And so that bifurcation of a public face and a public testimony versus what you're doing in private leads to a split personality where you become more and more shameful about who you are. You live more and more of a fake and a split life. And then the more you feel awful about constantly deceiving people and being this bad person, the more you need to self-medicate those awful feelings. And oftentimes you turn to porn more because orgasms feel good, and it leads you down this spiral, this toxic shame spiral, reinforcing the behavior. And there's no wonder that Utah leads the nation in porn use. Why would the one true church in the one state completely controlled in every way by Mormonism have amongst the highest porn usage and porn addiction problems in the country?
Right.
It's because of the shame and the guilt that's heaped upon it. It's because of this nurturing of a public and a private life and all the shame that's wrapped around it and all the fakeness of trying to pretend like it's not a big deal. In so many other cultures, it's like, oh yeah, I've looked at porn. It's no big deal. It's not that interesting. Okay, I look at it sometimes. But then you just go on and live a happy, healthy life. It's when it's demonized and shamed. And now Crystal's looking at Sean as a dirty, filthy person, or Sean's feeling like he is a dirty, filthy person. That's when the toxicity really starts to wrap itself around. And I do want to get to how you've worked through that, but I don't want to miss the timeline. So let's not jump ahead.
Okay.
I just want to say that I didn't like having a secret. That was my one secret. And I didn't like it. And there were times, John, where I felt such tremendous love for my wife, and the love was so immense. And I would look at her and I would say, like this voice in my head would say, tell her what you've been doing. And then it would almost leave my lips. I would almost say it. And then I would correct myself and I would think, is it worth losing your marriage over? And I would stop and I wouldn't tell her. I came forward to her with that information after we had left the church. She didn't.
We'll get there. Let's not get ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
I didn't like catch him. He told me. So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we'll get to that. So
okay.
That'll be a happy ending to the story.
Yeah.
Okay. So why'd you bring that up, Sean, in the midst of this sort of 4 or 5 years ago faith crisis?
Why'd I bring up the porn?
Yeah, I don't know,
because you
an
were
important part of that story.
I don't think that my behavior of periodically observing porn. I never looked at child porn. I never look at fetish porn. I never look at, violent porn. That if I ever even saw like violent porn pop up, I was disgusted by it, repulsive.
Right.
And so that's not my stuff. Like, we don't need to go into it. But bottom line is, I think looking back, my relationship to porn was probably a normal relationship to porn. I don't know that we're going to call it healthy, but I don't think it's crazy that I felt so horrible about it. And it's, I bring it up because you said that were there any other signs that you were, you said people, when they bury things and they're not authentic, it manifests itself in other ways. Now, here's what's crazy, John. I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but since I told Crystal that I looked at porn, I got to tell you, like, my desire to look at erotica has gone from here.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even have much of an interest in it at all anymore because now she knows, and she would allow me to if I really needed to, but I don't really have a taste for it like I did.
And that's the irony.
Yeah.
And we'll jump back to that.
It's like a gift. Like, you talk about miracles. I feel like there's a miracle in admitting you've seen it and looked at it or participated in it. And all of a sudden, and knowing that it's not what the church makes it out to be. And all of a sudden you go, it's that pink elephant syndrome, don't picture a pink elephant. And then yet we're all picturing a pink elephant. You can't suppress something that heavily and not have it backfire and proliferate on you.
Yeah.
And talk about how, you guys have been really good in your podcast and blog recently talking about sexual shame, sexuality, all these negative messages about sex from so young and all this shame. Crystal, what was that like for just your sexuality individually and as a couple throughout your Orthodox years? What did that do?
I definitely suppressed a lot. I think overall we had like healthy,
By Mormon standards, we had a very healthy sex life.
Yeah, but I didn't know that it could be even more amazing if I was able to release a lot of the Mormon mentality around it, which, when Sean would tell me certain things like, did you know there's a doctrine that says that you should only have sex to have babies? And
that's an old doctrine.
And then I would feel bad. I'm like, really? And then I would start feeling some shame around it again, so it would come and go. And, so I would wonder, do we have it too much? Do we like it too much? What if I need to fantasize? Is that bad? Like, we're all taught about, have control of your thoughts. Don't think about things that are inappropriate. And so I would feel really guilty if I, would fantasize about things. And that was really hard for me. That was like my secret, that I was holding in. And yeah, and that was, it made me feel like I had this secret and there's something wrong with me, or, so there's just a lot that
she would withhold sex a lot because she thought we weren't supposed to like sex.
Yeah. Like I would always try to make sure that you didn't see me naked. I would like hurry and cover up if I heard you coming up after I got out of the shower, just really trying hard to avoid it as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And she would say things to me, John, I'm sorry to jump in, but you would say things to me about my desire for sex.
Yeah, I'd be like, gosh, like, why do you like it so much? Like, can't you just...
She'd be like, you want it every day? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, something's wrong with you. Like,
yeah, I'd make.
And I wouldn't want it. I would just want it like once a day. I really love it, but it wasn't like I wanted it like 4 or 5 times a day. But she really looked at me like something was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I'm Spanish, man, Spanish blood. Like, they're passionate, romantic people.
Yeah, so I definitely suppressed a lot of my own sexual desires as well, based on what I'd been taught about it.
Right. Okay, so Sean, 4 or 5 years ago, you go into the suppression mode. Crystal, let's talk about your awakening as it relates to the church. And take as much time as you want to tell us how you got there.
This is my favorite part too.
That's fun to see you guys both smiling so big.
Yeah.
This is exciting. Can we skip the Sterling stuff? Just let's not do that.
Yeah, you've had to talk about it a lot.
Okay.
So since I started my own personal development and spiritual journey over the course of that 4 or 5 years, I just was reading a lot of books, and more so within the last, I've always been blogging and over the last 10 years, but then when I started writing the book, I started just really reading a lot, and then I was just excited about it too, and I felt like I was in this new stage of life where I had a little more time to read, and I couldn't stop, and I was just so excited about all the things that I was learning, and I started reading Martha Beck's book, Finding Your Own North Star, and I felt like that really started to allow me to think a little bit differently and wonder, what is my North Star, and
what does she mean by North Star?
Like finding your true path, and being the most authentic you. And I started to really analyze myself and wonder if I was being the most authentic me and following did I know what path where I was headed, where was my North Star? I don't know. And then I read The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and that really started to allow me to question my own spirituality. Like, it's the first time I ever heard that you are not your thoughts, and that was liberating for me. And I was like, really? And I was able to separate my soul from my mind, and also made me wonder that if I remember feeling like I don't feel like I have an untethered soul. The way he described it, I was like, I want to be an untethered soul. I feel so bound in so many ways, and it really started to make me think of certain scriptures that made me feel bound and why I couldn't just think freely on my own. And then I read Educated by Tara Westover, and
you don't know how much this woman reads. Wow. Oh man, like I married up.
But that book really was eye-opening for me because it's about her story as a Mormon and extreme Mormonism. And it made me wonder too, like, wait a minute, have I been brainwashed? Like the way she described it made me realize, like, it just really made me look at my own life a little bit more and really start to question a lot of things. And I was so intrigued by the story that I Googled her because she didn't really explain at the end of her book, like what she believes now as far as, around the church or around God. And so I love the story so much that I just wanted to know, well, where is she at spiritually? What does she believe? And so I Googled her, and I came across your interview on YouTube with her, which is also on your podcast. And I watched it, and I just remember just skipping.
Okay, real quick, before you jump in, had you heard anything about Mormon Stories or me?
I've never heard of
She
Mormon
thought
Stories.
it was faith promoting.
Okay, so what year is this? This
was just last year, exactly this time.
Okay, I just have to stop. It's 2018 in this timeline, 3 years after I've been excommunicated, right?
Yeah.
13 years after I started Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
She's living in Utah. I mean, if there's ever a testament, and the Youngs, Leah and Cody Young, same thing. Their awakening happened in like late 2017. I'm like, if ever there were a testimony to how much of a intellectual bubble that Mormons live in, these are people living in Utah. My mom's in Draper. Like, you guys are in Draper. My mom's in Draper. That you can get to 2018 having never heard of Mormon Stories or John Dehlin, or even though Sean, your story's in the New York Times, right? Uh-huh. And I thought, well, that's okay. But even though that's the world's largest circulation newspaper, most Mormons are never going to hear about that.
Yeah.
Because Mormons don't read the New York Times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, So it's just so mind-boggling to me that after Kate Kelly, after Jeremy Reynolds, after me, after all the excommunications, after all these podcasts, you arrive at 2018.
Yeah.
You're stumbling on Mormon Stories YouTube, and you're like, "Oh, what is this?
Yeah.
What could this be? This must be faith promoting."
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It just shows how much control the church has over information, over people's behavior, and over people's awareness of what's going on all around
you.
But and they keep us so busy.
Yeah.
You don't have time to read anything else.
Well, for the majority of my life in the church, I always felt this pressure that I had to read my scriptures first and listen to a conference talk and say a prayer. And by the time I did those things and write in my journal, by the time I did all those things, I didn't have time to read any other books. Mm-mm. And so once I just decided, I'm going to read some other books,
Remember what I did to you?
Yeah, he would make me feel bad if I ever did.
If she was reading anything, like one time I saw her watching like a Joel Osteen video, and like the Mormon came out in me, and I just came down on her like, how dare you? You know that guy has a $30 million house. How dare you watch that guy? And the Mormon just came out of me, and I was like, you are only allowed to read. It sounds really controlling, but I didn't tell her she had to, but I was like, you should only read church stuff.
Yeah. So that's what I did the majority of our marriage.
I'm sorry.
So isn't that weird that you had your own doubts and concerns, and yet you're being the enforcer?
Cognitive dissonance, I'm telling you.
We didn't mention this, but there was a lot that he made me feel, like music that I had listened to. I remember one time we were fasting. We were fasting, and I was like, I'm so tired. And you're like, you said some scripture, like, you're not supposed to show that you're tired or something.
Can we just stop?
But I just want to, say
that. This is good. This is important.
Like Sean also had a lot of.
Let's just say it. Can we just say it? Sean was a. Yeah.
He was self-righteous too. Although he had his doubts, he definitely was very self-righteous in the beginning. But we were to each other, so.
But it's just like, who are the most strident homophobes? It's gay religious men that are packing down their sexuality.
Yeah.
And so they're sometimes the most ferocious and mean homophobic people. In the LGBT world, it's called internalized homophobia.
Oh, yeah.
You had internalized,
the people that are doubting,
internalized
people that are doubting,
self-hatred.
Yeah,
John, people that are doubting, this, your most, what do they call it? Your most behemoth defenders. They're oftentimes they're the ones doubting.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Vehement.
Vehement. But yeah, it is funny because I remember telling Sean, like, I cannot believe I've never heard of Mormon Stories. He's been doing this for over 10 years,
yep.
Right? Yeah. I was like, what? How could I have
We're in our 14th year.
Yeah. So, yeah,
almost
when I
as
saw...
long as we've been married.
Yeah. So when I saw that episode, I just remember scrolling to the very end because I wanted to hear what her beliefs were.
Now, was this the interview I did with her alone, or I brought her to Salt Lake and we did a...
She was not with you. She was on her computer.
Okay, so this was my first interview with Tara Westerover before I brought her to Salt Lake, where we're doing a one-on-one.
Okay.
So you find that, you think it's faith promoting.
Yeah, I'm like, ooh, I love podcasts because I listen to podcasts all the time. I'm like, oh, good, this is probably perfect for me. Mormon Stories. I need Mormon Stories because I just wanted to hear, about other people's experiences in the church and hopefully finding somebody that could relate to me, because I didn't feel like I could always relate to. I wanted to find the stories that were a little more like, let's live spiritually, kind of a little more on our own terms, but we're still Mormon, because I didn't like having to follow everything so perfect and exact.
And you were feeling pretty spiritually unfulfilled is what I
Yeah,
remember.
for sure. That's why I finally allowed myself to read other books, because I'm like, I am not growing. I don't feel like I'm growing spiritually. So yeah, when I discovered your podcast and I got hooked. I couldn't stop listening, and it was so good and so intriguing and so informative.
How long did it take you to realize, number one, that I'd been excommunicated, and number two, that it wasn't always Orthodox?
It took probably about a week, but I was listening to it like a full-time job.
And what was interesting? How was it feeding you or not?
It was helping me because, and I didn't know. Yeah, it was helping me to allow myself to have my own questions and doubts, because I didn't feel like I was ever allowed to voice anything. And I wasn't enjoying the church. I wasn't enjoying it at all. And wondered what was wrong with me too. I started to wonder, why don't I like this? Why do I prefer to read these other books? And like, I love Oprah and all that she teaches, and I'd rather just follow Oprah than our own prophet, So, yeah, so I just started to feel a little more spiritually fulfilled through all the other things that I was reading, and I was feeling like alive again. Like, really, I was just getting so excited about all that I was learning, and I was feeling liberated, like so much liberation, realizing that I had put myself in this little box and not allowed myself to step out of it ever and try to experience a new realm of spirituality.
Can you recall any of the episodes on Mormon Stories in that early week or two that really hit you hard? Just for those who are going to go, oh,
yeah.
Well, what are some of the episodes that were useful to you? Do you remember any?
I know it was like I can't remember, it was like a former mission president or stake president.
She turned me on to Tom Phillips.
Roger Hendrix?
Yeah, that's what there was like 4 episodes or something, right?
It was like 10.5 hours with Roger Hendrix.
Yeah. It was really long and I loved all of it. So that was my very first one. Mm-hmm. And then I just went on and I found some, I was curious to know what you believed. So I was digging, trying to find an episode where you were talking more about what you believed now, because I knew it was obvious within the episode that you knew a lot about everything and things that I was totally unaware of. Yeah, so it was really eye-opening for me, and I just wanted so badly to know what you believed. And then I came upon the episode where you shared somebody. Do you want me to share this part?
Yeah. Okay. Was this Sean McCraney? Who's interviewing me?
I don't remember. Okay. Because I was just skipping through episodes. I was trying to find this one part. Just John Dehlin, tell me, what do you believe now?
So she kind of had, you'd built this rapport, through the interviews, and she was really...
Yeah, I had a lot of respect really because I could tell you really have done your research, It's just, I didn't really even consider Mormon Stories to be anti-Mormon at all. I thought it was very informative, and I didn't feel like, oh no, I shouldn't be listening to this. But when I found the episode where somebody had asked you, so what do you believe in God? What do you believe about God? And you said, well, before we get there,
you told me
about when I told Sean, and then this happened.
What did you tell Sean?
So then after listening,
we were in our bathroom
for a few days of the podcast, I was like, hey, you should I was trying to casually tell him because I thought maybe he would. Yeah, I thought maybe he might not agree with what I was, listening to everything that you were saying. Because overall, I thought it was good, and some episodes were faith promoting and just really informative. But I wasn't sure what he would think about it, so I just kind of tried to casually bring it up. Hey, you should listen to this Mormon Stories podcast. It's just a lot of stories from Mormons, and yeah, it's really good. And at first he's like, is it anti-Mormon? I'm like, no, it's not anti-Mormon at all, which I really didn't think it was, because in my mind, anti-Mormon is negative and just ignorant people just wanting to be angry towards the church. But I didn't sense any I didn't sense any anger whatsoever in any of the episodes that I listened to. So that, yeah, I had a lot of respect for you in that sense, because there was no anger. It's just more like matter of fact. This is the information, and let's just talk about it as adults. And so, yeah, I shared it with Sean, and he started listening to it. I think you got hooked. And 3 days later, I remember laying on our bed. You pulled your earphones out of your ears, and you're like, we've been duped. And I was like, I already kind of knew, at that point I was like, yeah, I kind of think that the church is not true. But when he said it, it was like, whoa, this is real. Like we're probably going to do something about this.